Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Libya asks the World Health Organization to give it access to extra funds by raising it into the top category for health emergencies. There fears that the political and security crisis risks bringing medical services to a halt. Also, on the eve of the start of the Crimes Against Humanity trial of Ivory Coast's former leader, Laurent Gbagbo, we hear from those who hold him responsible for fatal post-electoral violence and those who think he's being made a scapegoat. And living the vida mocha. Ugandan coffee may have quite the international reputation, but it gets little love at home. We meet the baristas trying to whip up local affection for their beans. First, up to 70% of Libya's hospitals have been forced to shut or are close to grinding to a halt because of the country's ongoing crisis. And almost 3 million euros a day is needed to buy medicine. So says Libya's health minister. The country raised the alarm with the World Health Organization on Wednesday, asking to be moved into the highest category for health emergencies. Now, that would put it alongside other crisis-struck nations like Syria, Iraq, and those West African countries hit hardest by Ebola. Libya's been in chaos since its 2011 revolution, and political progress has been slow. The WHO's representative in the country says that vulnerable communities can't afford to wait.
The political process may be taking long to materialize and mature, and the humanitarian situation or the need of the people, Libyan people, in terms of the humanitarian situation cannot wait longer. People need support now, not when the political process will materialize and stability will come back to the country. The second is that people are, children, mothers, old people are dying because healthcare, the most basic healthcare is not available. Hospitals, for example, in health sector, hospitals are out of life-saving medicines. Health facilities are being attacked, damaged, and becoming non-functional. Now or never is my call of action for the international community. The myth that Libya is a high-income country or upper middle-income country and it may not need resources is not working in this case, because there isn't money even to buy the most basic vaccines, insulin, for the people who are in dire need of these resources.
Jafar Hussein there, the WHO's representative in Libya, speaking to me a little earlier on. In other news, at least 9 victims were killed in the Nigerian town of Chibok on Wednesday after a group of around 5 female suicide bombers detonated their devices. Chibok is where nearly 300 schoolgirls were kidnapped by Boko Haram extremists in April 2014. Over 200 of those young girls remain missing. Now, the investigation into the jihadist attack on a top hotel and a cafe in Ouagadougou continues in Burkina Faso. 30 people were killed and dozens injured in the January 15th raid. Well, on Wednesday, police said that they were looking at the possibility of the attackers having had an inside man at the targeted Splendid Hotel.
On the one hand, the Splendid Hotel was used by the attackers as a place for a tactical withdrawal. And on the other hand, there's the possibility that there was knowledge from within the hotel. It's a line of inquiry we're following. We haven't yet resolved it, but it hasn't been dismissed.
Well, for the first time, the International Criminal Court will judge a former head of state. The Crimes Against Humanity trial of the former Ivorian president, Laurent Gbagbo, and his former youth leader, Charles Blé Goudé, opens in The Hague on Thursday. Now, the case is being hotly anticipated in Ivory Coast. Our correspondent sent us this report on the eve of the start of proceedings.
It's a day no one here in Abobo can forget. On the 17th of March 2011, when post-election violence was at its peak, 2 explosives were launched into a market packed with women and children. At least 40 people died and dozens more were injured in the town, a place loyal to current President Alassane Ouattara. Fanta still carries remnants of shrapnel within her.
All of a sudden, I heard this explosion. The first one, the shell landed there. The second fell within the market. I was hit by shrapnel.
I can never forget it. Why? Because every time I think about it, the wounds reopen. They talk about reconciliation. We are trying, but we have to heal first. We're suffering.
These victims are impatient to see the ICC trial open. It's the only way they can start a new chapter.
For more than a decade, repeatedly, criminals have been allowed to act with impunity. So we are urging the justice system to act against those who are behind these crimes in the Ivory Coast.
But just a few kilometres away in a Gbagbo stronghold, feelings couldn't be more different. Here in Yopougon, supporters of the former president hope their leader will be acquitted. They condemn what they believe is a legal witch hunt.
The pro-Gbagbo are in prison. They've been humiliated. They've been fired. But despite that, they still believe in Gbagbo.
It's been 5 years since the end of Ivory Coast's post-election crisis, but the country is divided once more. To heal those wounds, all sides are looking towards The Hague.
The president of Nigeria and Somalia joined Kenya's leader on Wednesday to pay tribute to the Kenyan soldiers killed whilst on a peacekeeping duty in Somalia. Muhammadu Buhari and Hassan Sheikh Mohammed attended the event at a military barracks in Eldoret, Kenya, and its president, Uhuru Kenyatta, led the interfaith memorial service on Wednesday. Somali al-Shabaab extremists claimed 100 Kenyan peacekeepers were killed in the raid on an AU base earlier this month. Kenyan authorities have yet to confirm the number of fatalities. Well, the group phase of the African Nations Championships ended on Wednesday in Rwanda. Duncan Woodside brings us up to date with the two games, which both ended in draws, allowing Zambia and Mali through to the quarterfinals.
The last of the group games took place here today in Rwanda. Zambia finishing with a 0-0 draw here at the city of Kigali Stadium against Mali. That's enough for both of those teams to progress. Zambia having topped the group previously, having won both of their games, and Mali had been on 4 points prior to today's game. Mali now finishing with 5 points. So that 0-0 draw played out, a rather dull game here in truth, both sides knowing that they had to do very little to qualify, that a draw would be enough to take Mali through, and obviously Zambia had no interest in exerting themselves too much since they wanted to save their energy for the quarterfinals, having already qualified. Now in the other game in this group today, Uganda shared the spoils 1-1 with Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe had obviously made a very poor start to the group stages, losing both their first two games, snatching a point or taking a point today, whereas Uganda will feel disappointed that they didn't manage to win. That, though, would not have been enough for Uganda to progress in light of the draw here between Zambia and Mali. So it's the quarterfinals next, all of those games taking place on Saturday and Sunday.
Duncan Woodside there for us in Kigali. Well, Uganda may grow some of the world's best coffee and be Africa's largest exporter, but consumption stands at only 3% of what's produced. That could be set to change, though, as the cafe culture starts gathering pace with the country's growing middle class. Take a look.
Thick espressos and creamy cappuccinos go head-to-head at this barista championship in Uganda. A competition to show off the candidates' brewing skills, but also to promote coffee consumption across the country.
Appreciate coffee in a way I never thought possible. You've got different coffee beans, that's what I've come to discover, and the creativity from the contestants.
Ugandan citizens have always preferred tea to coffee, a habit some trace back to British colonial rule. And despite growing some of the world's best beans, local consumption has remained low in the country, which currently exports around 97% of its total production. Yet things could be about to change, as a new coffee drinking culture has begun to develop among Uganda's growing middle class.
Almost every building in Kampala is having a coffee shop. And I believe in the next 10 years, Uganda coffee consumption will be very competitive in this part of the world.
Uganda's 500,000 farmers have made it Africa's biggest coffee exporter, but it still has some catching up to do when it comes to consumption. In neighboring Ethiopia, the continent's largest producer, the population drinks around half of all locally grown coffee.
Well, it's time for me to go seek out a brew. That's the end of Eye on Africa for now. Stay with us, more coming up.
Talking Europe.
This week, Talking Europe is getting out into the countryside with a rural tour of Europe. The Common Agricultural Policy was revamped last year, but controversy over the end of milk quotas and its claims to help the environment have sprouted. To investigate, we talk to farmers in Belgium, Italy and Germany, and we visit the European Commissioner for Agriculture in his native Ireland. Don't miss this special, rural edition of Talking Europe.